All right, so welcome to week one. This week, your readings were supposed to cover Buck and Knapp, Geary, Knapp, and Lepaco, with the Knapp 2013 reading, so just Knapp by himself. Um, I just want you to cover or skim this article. It gives insights on researchers, but the other articles I think explain better. Of what nonverbal communication is and kind of give you an introduction to what nonverbal communication is. So by the time you get to Lepaco, it's just kind of little insights and details. But really, the Buck and Knapp and the Geary articles, I think, are the two that you should really focus on for this week. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to give you the highlights. That's all this video is going to do is just give you the highlights for the readings. That way, you can go back through, you can watch this video um, to maybe understand what I think is most important for this course. So, starting with Buck and Knapp, let's start with the background. So, obviously, nonverbal communication is very important, and it's been around long before records were taken, pottery became a thing, paintings, etc. Um, so, nonverbal communication is in everything that we do. There's nothing you can communicate without having some sort of nonverbal communication. I mean, I always use myself as an example in these videos because this is an online course. Again, I told you I'm probably going to look like a potato. Now, that might communicate that I don't care. That's not true, but when you see an instructor dressed down, I mean, I have my hair in bubble braids, I don't have any makeup on, that might communicate that, I'm not prepared or I don't care about this topic, which couldn't be further from the truth. Sorry, I was moving my computer. Um, but these things actually do matter. The tattoos that you have, the jewelry that you wear. So, wearing a ring finger, or wearing a ring finger, of course, you're wearing a ring finger, wearing a ring on your ring finger on your left hand, that signifies that you're married, that communicates something. Um, so, nonverbal is very important, and it kind of started with our walking styles, our gestures, and our handshakes. These are all a part of our nonverbal communication. I was always told never trust a person with a weak handshake, right? Because that communicates that they're weak in business, they're weak in power, they're not somebody that you really need or potentially even want on your team. So, just one of those focuses, and I don't know that I fully believe that because nonverbal can change, of course, but that's one thing that they used to be huge in business scenarios and business interactions. Moving forward in that article, they talk about the rhetoric and delivery. So it starts with Confucius. And I do want to apologize. My voice is kind of raspy right now. I do pause the video at times. So if it looks like it breaks up and then comes back and it's not the same, like it didn't match up perfectly, that's because I pause it for a drink of water and stuff. So um, trying not to take up more of your time than I have to. So Confucius in China, Confucius stated, he's like, I would like to do without words. I would like to communicate without words. And people are like, well, how is that even possible? That's not possible. How are you knowing what people mean? And he answered with, well, how does the sky talk? And that's an interesting point. How does the sky talk? Our day and night changes, our seasons go on, everything is born. And that's nonverbal communication, right? If you look, I mean, right now it's kind of flurrying, it's kind of snowing outside. We know how we should dress because of what the weather is telling us, but the weather's not using words. And so that's pretty interesting. Um, Scholars in Athens, they did studies of public speaking, and that led to the study of nonverbal behaviors and behaviors that are happening during speech delivery. The Romans took it a step further and really studied, refined, clarified, categorized, and expanded upon these behaviors of speech delivery. So, nonverbal communication isn't something that we were just like, oh, yeah, this is from like the 1950s. It became bigger in that time period, but really it started, in early BC. This started with um, Athens scholars and Roman scholars. And that's a long time to be studying this, and it's not just what are you not saying, right? It's everything. So in the 19th century, there were two influential works that really led to categorizing nonverbal communication to what it is today. So the first is DiGiorgio focused on gestures in everyday life and used these gestures that people were doing in the 19th century to understand our past. So specifically, what were these depictions on vases and sculptures, right? What does that tell us about how they lived and how they communicated? So DiGiorgio is actually credited with four separate things. The first being establishing the importance of context. The second is identifying gestures and, excuse me, functions with those words. So, what does crossing your arms mean when you're talking? What does your use of space, I mean, they didn't have a subway back then, but your use of space on the subway, what does that mean? And how do we classify that with the words? How are they interrelated? Um, Third is treating gestures as communication codes. So I say one thing, but I do another. What does that mean? What is that code? And fourth is the approach to making a nonverbal dictionary, right? So we have a dictionary of words. What does this nonverbal dictionary of gestures and body positions look like? And how do we use it? All right. The second major influential work for the 19th century is Darwin, and we know that Darwin studied evolution and the evolutionary perspective, right? Survival of the fittest. But Darwin first studied facial expressions, and scholars today recognize that we get our facial expression studies from Darwin's expressions. He studied primates, he studied people, and he really focused on this evolutionary perspective. Um, Sorry, my bobby pin moved and it's like pulling my hair. He really studied this evolutionary perspective, and he found that there are some universal traits for facial expressions. So, if a person smiles in America, it's the same as if a person smiles in Japan. Those are two very different cultures. So, those facial expressions mean the same here as they do there. That's not true for all nonverbal communication, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the Geary article. Um, but there are some facial expressions that are evolutionary. You'll probably read a lot about Ekman and his study of facial expressions, and he's kind of the modern, excuse me, he's kind of the modern father of facial expressions and really taken it to that new level that we use today. So on WVU's campus in our communication lab, we actually have facial recognition software, which I know is kind of controversial because a lot of people are like, oh, they're taking our face, they're using it, the government's using it. I know when I study facial recognition, the study that I currently want to work on is, if y'all watch The Office, I'm obsessed with it. And the episode where Jim gives Pam the bracelet and Pam gives Jim a comic book. I personally don't think he likes it based on his nonverbal reactions, his facial expressions, his body language, his tone, the little sigh when he talks. So that's what I'm using the facial recognition software for. I'm not using it for anything that could be used against people, but I know it's kind of conspiracy theory. So, But Ekman is really the father of our modern facial expression recognition. Um, he took these levels from the 80s and into today. So, Paul Ekman, like, that's a name you'll probably hear a lot for facial expressions when we talk about them in this course. So, moving forward to the early 20th century, there are four key components that were used to study nonverbal communication. So, we had direct observation. So, physically watching people, typically without them knowing it, right? That sounds really creepy, but it's all about being natural, being there, being in that moment. And then we have filmed interaction. So, we would have people come in, we would film them, and then we would make sense of their nonverbal communication. Next, we have the frequency of the interactions, and this is shown on graphs and charts. And it's really important because it can tell whether you really like a person or whether you really don't. Um, so, currently, right now, I also work at a pizza place to make some extra cash because I'm only adjunct. And It's been told to me that I'm a person who, I show nice gestures. I'm nice to my coworkers. If I don't like them, you can't really tell. There's one guy at the place that, like, I liked him up until last week. And then he made some comments, and I was just really taken aback, and I did not like him. And everybody was like, "We could tell you didn't like him because you actually showed some, like, facial expressions. You were rolling your eyes. You would just, like, look like you were going crazy." And I really was. The comments that were made were just so out of line, and I'm not gonna get into that, of course, but the frequency of those gestures that showed dislike, disdain were just so in abundance, right? And that happens. That tells people, I like this, I don't like this, this situation is making me upset, or this person is making me happy, right? We show good gestures when we like people too. So, frequency is really important. When you really like something or really don't, those gestures, those facial expressions, your tone, that changes. And how often that you use those expressions or those gestures, that tone is really important. And then finally, sketches. People can sketch things. If you've ever gone to, I don't know, like Six Flags or a place like that and done the caricatures, those characters really exaggerate your features. And so if you're wanting to look like you're in love with the person you're getting the caricature with, that makes a big difference. The gestures that you use or you say to describe what you want or what that person actually draws. And then we get to the 1950s, and this really laid a foundation for nonverbal studies because it became a key part in understanding communication. We started to focus on your handshake. Do you have a firm handshake? Do you have a weak handshake? And that made a role in business. Something as small as how well you shake hands became important. But after the 1950s, the focus moved from the face and the body to include paralanguage. So it's not really what you say, it's how you say it. I can say, yeah, I'm fine, but that doesn't sound very convincing. And concerns of overpopulation in the 1950s. So we had that nuclear family in the 1950s of the mom, the dad, and the two kids, typically a boy and a girl. That was a nuclear family. But that overpopulation, how we talk about it, our body language, what we show versus what we say, and how we talk about it. And all of this really led to our current perspectives of nonverbal communication and how we study this field. So moving forward to Geary article started with the focus on Darwin's expression, which I just talked about in the last article. So you can read it here, of course, but it's just going to be a repeat of. But what the Geary article makes a note about that I think the other article kind of lacks in is we do make judgments about these facial expressions, about the nature and behavior of people based on their visual cues, right? So the guy that was making me really mad at work last week, he started to just leave me alone. He didn't talk to me, he didn't look at me, he didn't come near me because he could tell based on my visual cues. Every time he said something, I just rolled my eyes. Like, this was a all right, I'm gonna tell you so I can not just keep talking about it. Again, you don't have to watch this part if you don't want to, it's fine. He made a comment about our friend, his girlfriend's mom was just diagnosed with cancer, right? Really tough situation. And they've been having problems long before the diagnosis. I think both of them wanted to break up. But how do you handle that? How do you handle that situation? There's never a good time to break up, but with something like your mom having cancer. And this guy at work just kept making comments that were rude. And he goes, well, just end it. She's going to be dealing with this anyway, and blah, blah, blah. And he was just being really rude about it. And as somebody who just lost their mom to cancer last May, um, there's a delicate way to handle that. And he's like, well, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't understand. You're not in his position. His girlfriend's the one whose mom has cancer, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, been in a relationship for 5 years and I just lost my mom to cancer. So think I might have a little bit of an insight on that. But he could tell that comment really made me mad. I mean, like, I was fuming, steam coming out of my ears. So he left me alone because my facial expressions, my visual cues, he judged that as, oh crap, I've made her mad. I should just leave her alone. Right. And so we judge people based on this. Sorry if that was a little too personal. I'm a very open person. So if you have any questions about anything in this class or in life, come to me. I'll talk to you about things. But we make these judgments, right? So our verbal communication would be ineffective without these nonverbal cues, right? Because I didn't say anything. I didn't say, hey, X, you really pissed me off, right? I didn't say that. And it would probably be effective to just say that, at least somewhat, but maybe he wouldn't have left me alone. But my nonverbal communication, I would walk away anytime he came near. I would roll my eyes anytime he said anything. That was pretty effective. Like, ugh, I should leave this girl alone. Right. So it makes a difference with not only with what we say, but with what our body is saying. What is your face saying? And this is a problem for people with resting bitch face, which I have. I've been told several times, like, oh, I thought you were a bitch, but you're really cool. Right. Because my face says, "Leave me alone," but really that's not what I mean, okay? So the Geary article really focuses on these judgments that we make, and the human communication actually starts before our words ever actually do. So think about this. You're out at a bar, well, when times were normal. You're out at a bar, you see somebody across the bar who's very attractive, and you're like, "Ooh, I like that." Right? So we kinda do these glances, we might wave a little bit, my friends during undergrad used to pull the I would, bump into them, right? I didn't say anything, I just bumped into them. And then our communication starts. So this nonverbal communication actually happens before we ever use words. Um, Second, culture. Culture makes a big difference. And this is where I was really getting into this from this last article. Um, we have these rules for culture and how we should use space, time, touch, artifacts, such as tattoos, clothing, jewelry, and body cues, right? So, how do we use space here in America? I mean, that's kind of dependent upon gender. Men typically take up more space than women, and that's because all of us have kind of grown accustomed to these rules that men are just going to take up more space. Um, but you think about, I have a big sectional couch. I'm using one one little cushion. That's my cushion. My boyfriend takes up one whole half, right? How do we use space here in America? Time. Time in America, there's a saying, to be early is to be to be on time is to be late, and to be late is to be forgotten, right? It's one of my favorite sayings. So when you go to work, you're expected to clock in like at least a couple minutes beforehand, right? Um, you can't clock in after your shift is started or you're going to get in trouble. But in Spanish cultures, they get what is known as siestas. So, you know, times of rest in the middle of the day. They also aren't as strict on time constraints. So if they say, hey, the party starts at 7 or the workday starts at 7, let's go workday. Because even in America, parties, they start at 7, but we are fashionably late. But the workday starts at 7 and you get there at 7:30, you're probably not going to be in trouble for that, right? How do we use touch? How do different cultures use touch? Eye contact. That's huge in Eastern cultures versus Western cultures. So we're a Western culture, and when we're talking, we expect eye contact from the person that we're talking to. It's just something that we expect. However, excuse me, in Eastern cultures, a lower level or a lower ranking person should not use eye contact with a higher ranking person. It's a sign of disrespect, right? And then tattoos, artifacts, our clothing, our jewelry. We talked about rings, but like tattoos. In American culture, Western culture, tattoos are just body expression. I have lots of tattoos. I've got a little, I don't know if you can see it. It's a moon behind my ear. My mom used to call me her little moon, and my brother was her stars. And so I got a tattoo of a moon, and my mom got a moon and stars on her wrist. And that signified family to us. That was a body expression. But well, I went to Japan and I got a tattoo when I was in Japan. It's cherry blossoms, signifies my time there. I really loved that trip. But people in Japan just don't, tattoos are not really a thing they do. It's a sign of disrespect. And I'm sure you've heard about like the Yakuza mafia. They have tattoos, but you would never know it because they're down to their wrists, like where a cuff would be, and up to their collarbones. So when you wear dress shirts, when you wear specific clothes out in public, nobody knows. And it signifies that you're a member of this group, but and I don't know that they're mafia. I think I said that, but I don't know their culture very well. But you're a member of this group, but the general public doesn't know that. Okay? So those are all the different perspectives. Next is the modes that you really need to focus on. These are the modes of nonverbal communication. So we have proxemics. This is the study of territory and space. Having a private office versus having a cubicle desk, right? What do those signify? Haptics, this is the study of touch. What does a hug communicate? What does a hand on the shoulder communicate? We've got oculesics. This is the study of eye behavior. So, what does glances looking at or glances mean? What does staring at someone mean? Chronemics. This is the study of time. How do we use time? What does that communicate to us? Kinesics, the study of your movements, your gestures, your body language, your facial expressions. And then we have physical environment and appearance. So, kind of what I talked about with like tattoos and artifacts. Study of how do you use your environment? What does this say about you? How do you dress? How do you wear your hair? What does that say about you? And I know I'm kind of going against the norm because I'm your professor. I have a PhD, but most professors, we expect them to be in, you know, dress clothes when they're communicating with us or teaching us. Unless you get there's like those old PhDs that they're not necessarily old, but they got their PhD early on and they show up in a Hawaiian shirt to teach you and cargo pants, right? And you're just kind of like, what? Right? So, what does that communicate? And then there's paralanguage. So, this is sometimes called vocalics, and it's a study of our voice. So, it doesn't matter what you say, it's how you say it, right? Yeah, I'm fine. Doesn't sound very convincing. You're probably not fine. You need some help. Next is the NAP article. Like I said, just skim this article. It gives insight on the researchers in the field of communication, but also um, the, oh, what do I want to say? The field of nonverbal. Sorry. And then LaPaco. So this article, again, really just reiterates everything the first two articles said. But LaPaco, it's 7% verbal communication, 38% vocal, and 55% facial. So 93% of our communication is based in nonverbal communication. So we trust our nonverbal communication over our verbal communication. And this can include the paralanguage. So yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good. Right? Um, our body language, our face have this mystique that really tells more than what you're saying, right? So nonverbal communication is very important. It's very important for study. Um, and it's all about how you use it. So I'm going to put these notes that I've taken up on eCampus with this video. You don't have to look at them, they're just what I went through. Sometimes I think it's easier. So if you're looking for a specific part, and I went into more depth than just my notes on parts, so you can really use these to um, get to the point of, oh, it was this part in the video. I need to be listening for this or whatever. So I'm going to put those on there. I don't know that I'll use these every week, but I'm going to try. I think that they can really benefit you. So, yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Good luck this first week. You have a discussion post due. Um, so, yeah. Enjoy the first week of classes, and if you have any questions along the way, let me know. Oh, Didn't stop.